Narayanam namaskritya naram cheva narottamam devim saraswatim yasam tato jaya mudirayet nastapresu abhadresu nityam bhagavata sevayam Bhagavati Islamuktoke Bhaktir Bhavati Naistiki Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare Srimad Bhagavad Gita Grantaraj Ki Jai. Hare Krishna. Today we have a little different presentation. We're going to speak about probably the most famous Indian scientist named Jagadish Chandra Bose, and give a little bit of his history and how he used the Vedic knowledge as the beginning point of his scientific research. He was a real scientist. But he was living, he was the first recognized intellectual scientist of Indian origin, recognized by Western scientists. And his research was way ahead of his time. In fact, only today they're catching up to what Jagadish Chandra Bose did over 100 years ago. But very similar to Galileo, he was in an atmosphere of the Industrial Revolution in Europe and Darwinism. So he had to be careful what he said, otherwise he would have been rejected completely by the scientific community. But his beginning inspiration for his research was definitely the Vedas. So we're going to hear about that tonight. So we'll go next. So many years ago, His Divine Grace A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada had a discussion with a French cardinal of the Catholic Church. His name is Cardinal Danielou, and he was the leader of the Catholic Church in France. So he was a very highly placed man. And during that discussion, they were able to... During their discussion, the following things were said. This is Cardinal Danielou speaking. I arranged that meeting. I knew someone who knew Cardinal Danielou, and through that person, we were able to contact him and organize this meeting. So, Cardinal Danielou says, certainly not. But the idea that all life, no, just leave it like this, don't it? But the idea that all life is part of the life of God is difficult for us to admit. Now, he's speaking from the Catholic Christian point of view. We didn't start at the beginning of the discussion. We're coming in the middle, but this is very important. He's saying, Prabhupada was telling him that all living entities are part and parcel of Krishna. It's not just that human beings have a soul, animals don't have a soul. Cardinal Danielou is arguing against that. He's saying, the idea that all life is part of the life of God is difficult for us to admit. There is a great difference between human life and animal life. Srila Prabhupada. That difference is due to the development of consciousness. In the human body, there is developed consciousness. Even a tree has a soul, but a tree's consciousness is not very developed. If you cut a tree, it does not resist. Actually, it does resist, but only to a very small degree. There is a scientist named Jagadish Chandra Bose who has made a machine which shows that trees and plants are able to feel pain when they are cut. And we can see directly that when someone comes to kill an animal, it resists, it cries, it makes a horrible sound. So it is a matter of the development of consciousness. But the soul is there within all living beings. Okay? So Prabhupada is presenting the Vedic point of view to Cardinal Danielu, who was having a very difficult time accepting it, and he didn't accept it. Okay, next. So, in May 10th, 1901, Jagadish Chandra Bose amazed the Royal Academy of Sciences in London. This is 1901, right? The central hall of the Royal Society in London was jam-packed with famous scientists on May 10th, 1901. Everyone seemed to be curious to know how Bose's experiment will demonstrate that plants have feelings like other living beings and humans. Bose chose a plant whose tips were cautiously dipped up to its stem in a vessel holding the bromide solution. Bromide solution is poison. The salts of the hydrobromic acid are considered a poison. He plugged in the instrument with the plant and viewed the lighted spot on a screen showing the movements of the plant. As its pulse beat and the spot began to and fro movement similar to a pendulum. Now this is before it's actually in contact with the bromide solution. So it's showing some uniform pulse. Within minutes, the spot vibrated in a violent manner and finally came to an abrupt stop. So when the poison is administered to the plant, that uniform movement becomes very erratic and starts to move in a violent manner, and eventually it stops. The whole thing was almost like a poisoned rat fighting against death. The plant had died due to the exposure to the poisonous bromide solution. The event was greeted with much appreciation. However, some physiologists were not content and considered Bose as an intruder. They harshly knocked the experiment, but Bose did not give up and was quite confident about his findings. Okay, this is 1901. Bose invents the Crescograph. A Crescograph is a device for measuring growth in plants. It was invented in the early 20th century by Sir Jagadish Chandra Bose, an Indian polymath, physicist, biologist, botanist, and archaeologist. The Bose Crescograph uses a series of clockwork gears and a smoked glass plate to record the movement of the tip of a plant or its roots at magnifications of up to 10,000. Marks are made on the plate at intervals of a few seconds, demonstrating how the rate of growth varies under varying stimuli. This is very important. Bose experimented with temperature, chemicals, gases, and electricity as stimuluses to the plant. Next. Using the Crescograph, he further researched the response of the plants to fertilizers, light rays, and wireless waves. The instrument received widespread acclaim, particularly from the Path Congress of Science in 1900. Many physiologists also supported his findings later on using more advanced instruments. In other words, 60, 70 years later, other people tried to reproduce his experiments, but they had more sophisticated instruments, and they verified everything that he had claimed 70 years old. And then they went further. Like today, this research is being carried on now, and it's very exciting for the scientific community. They are proving that plants communicate with each other. Plants can perform mathematical calculations on choosing how much nutrients they take in, depending on their need, not depending on, yes. And they communicate with each other. They can tell when aphids, these little bugs, are attacking. So one plant will communicate with the other plant. So the other plant produces some antigens or something to protect itself. They've proved that this is happening. This is 70, 80, 90, 100 years later. So Dr. Jagadish Chandra Bose invented the Crescograph, an electrical instrument that could measure the growth of a plant. So this shows the instrument that he created. Go ahead. And this is the original experimental equipment created by Bose. You can see this today in the Bose Museum in Calcutta. All these original instruments that he created, and what he found through his scientific experiments. Go ahead. Life of Jagadish Chandra Bose. Sir Jagadish Chandra Bose, 1858-1937, was an Indian physicist and plant... Okay, children should not make noise like this. Was an Indian physicist and plant physiologist who did pioneering work in the measurement of plant growth and the responsiveness of plants to external stimuli. The life and scientific career of Jagadish Chandra Bose are rooted in the social ferment and the vital nationalism that made Bengal the intellectual center of India in the 19th century. In fact, people used to say, whatever Bengal is thinking, the rest of India follows. So at this time, some of the greatest scientists, politicians, poets, and so forth were coming out of Bengal. He was born on November 30th, 1858 at Maimen Singh, now in East Bengal, where his father was a deputy magistrate. The elder Bose sent Jagadish to the traditional village school to give him a grounding in Indian culture, and then to St. Xavier's School and College in Calcutta, where a Jesuit teacher encouraged his scientific interests. At great financial hardship to the family, Bose went to the University of London in 1880 to study medicine. After a year, he transferred to Cambridge to study science. He received degrees from Cambridge in 1884 and from London in 1885. His teachers, including the famous physicist Sir Rayleigh, recognized his brilliance and recommended him to high British officials in India for employment. Bose became professor of physics at Presidency College, Calcutta. Although he encountered racial discrimination as the first Indian to hold that post, within a few years he was acknowledged as a scientist of a caliber unknown before in India. At that time, there was virtually no provision for scientific research in Indian universities. So his achievements were all the more extraordinary. In 1887, he married a Madras medical student, Abala Das, who shared in her husband's scientific interests. Bose demonstrated radio transmission in Calcutta. Bose's first experiments, which concerned the transmission of electrical energy, were extensions of the work of such pioneers as James Clerk Maxwell and Heinrich Rudolf Hertz. This work led Bose to an interest in the possibilities of radio communication, and some of his experiments paralleled, if they did not actually precede, those of Guglielmo Marconi. Bose is said to have demonstrated radio transmission in Calcutta in 1895. That's at least 2-3 years before Marconi. Before Marconi. Marconi got the credit because Bose was Brahminical. He refused to patent anything that he discovered. He didn't believe in patents. He thought that his knowledge should be shared with everyone. And he shared it with Marconi, who then patented it and got the credit for discovering the radio, although Bose is the one that actually discovered it. Bose then turned to the work that brought him his greatest fame, the measurement of responses of plants to such stimuli as light, sound, touch, and electricity. His research convinced him that there were no clear-cut boundaries between the nervous systems of plants and of animals. To carry out his experiments, he invented the crescograph, an instrument capable of magnifying movements of growth in plants 10,000 times. Okay, the children have to be quiet. Bose's experiments brought him world fame while he was still a young man, and he made many lecture tours to the universities of Europe and America. The British government knighted him in 1916, the year after his retirement from Presidency College. Bose's researches in plant life and metals. The validity of his experiments was often attacked, partly on the basis of his experimental techniques, but more often because of the mystical religious implications that he found in his research, as when he claimed that plants, like animals, adjusted to change through inherited memory of the past. Why? Because plants also have a soul, like human beings. So people were objecting to him because it implied, what does it imply? The same thing that Cardinal Danielou was arguing with Prabhupada about. The Catholic Church does not, and Christianity does not accept that plants and animals have souls. He insisted that not only could no line be drawn between plants and animals, but that his researches had shown there was no line between living and non-living matter. He felt that he had substantiated in the laboratory the Vedic understanding that the whole material universe is animated because of the presence of innumerable and individual living entities, Jivatma, and the omnipresent supersoul expansion of Lord Krishna, Paramatma, the supreme individual. Bose, genuine scientist, follows scriptures. See now, why didn't anyone else think of measuring plants with stimulus? Because they were all under the assumption that plants are not, they're living, but they don't have a soul. So who cares if they resist or don't resist the stimuli? Who cares if they communicate? It's not important. The Supreme Lord is present in the heart of every living entity as the overseer, permitter, and witness of all action. He is also present in every atom of the universe. The Bhagavad Gita confirms this universal truth. Krishna tells Arjuna, with a single fragment of myself, I pervade and support this entire universe. Bhagavad Gita 10:42. Bose attempted to demonstrate that the gap between living and non-living matter was less distinct than normally supposed. See, now he's going farther. He's not only talking about plants and animals that are living beings, now he's talking about non-living things also. Bose attempted to demonstrate that the gap between living and non-living matter was less distinct than normally supposed, and he claimed that even stones had some rate of life similar to that of living organisms. Next. In 1901, he demonstrated to the Royal Society in Britain that the responses of metals, not only plants, of metals, to poison and other stimuli resembled muscular response in living organisms. Bose was a genuine scientist in the sense that he began his research work by accepting the a priori truths. A priori truth means truth that is self-evident. You cannot argue with it. Like if I say, every person has a mother and father. Are you going to argue with me? No, that's an a priori truth. It's self-evident. You can't argue against it. He began his research work by accepting the a priori truths of the Vedic scriptures as the impetus for his research. Like for example, scientists, sometimes they do junk science. Like for example, there was one scientific research project in a university. It took 10 years and $20 million. They wanted to determine if you need a mother and father to raise a child. After 10 years of research and $20 million, the final conclusion was, yes, you do need a mother and father to raise a child, so that child grows up psychologically stable. That's called junk science. We don't have to reinvent the wheel. We don't have to research what's self-evident. You see? So we begin from the Vedic scripture. We don't begin with nonsense assumptions. In the Brahma Samhita, Lord Brahma reveals that Krishna is present as the supersoul in every atom of the universe. Andantarasta paramanu chayantarastam. In other words, Krishna is present in the heart of every living being as Paramatma. He's also present in every atom of the universe. That's why things work. That's why things are going on seemingly automatically, because Krishna is completely in control of everything, because he's present in everything, every atom and in the heart of every living being. Researchers in plant life and metals, this is one graph of record of the variation and excitability of a plant during 24 hours. And this is one book that he wrote called Irritability of Plants that we're going to quote from in a minute. The mystery of material creation. The mystery of material creation is revealed in the Vedic scriptures. Everything in material nature is conscious. Everything, not just human beings, not just plants and animals, but even rocks and clouds and mountains. Everything has some degree of consciousness. The Bhagavad Gita discusses that there are three things to consider when examining the body of a living entity. The material body, the individual living entity, Jivatma, the individual soul, within the body, along with the super soul, Paramatma, which is an expansion of Krishna. Bhagavad Gita 13.3. In other words, there are two souls in every living body, the Jivatma and the Paramatma. The individual Jivatma has its consciousness limited by the type of body it has. The Paramatma, like for example, the consciousness of a dog is different than the consciousness of a human being. A dog doesn't see life in the same way a human being does. And the consciousness of a plant is even more limited than that of a dog. The Paramatma, being omnipresent in the heart of every living being, is conscious of all living beings. Paramatma is conscious of everything. The Paramatma is omniscient, meaning knows everything, and the Jivatma has limited awareness. I don't know what's in your mind right now. You don't know what's in my mind. But Krishna knows what's in your mind, in my mind, and everybody's mind. When we examine certain rocks, clouds, mountains, and other material bodies that grow and diminish in size, we also see some of the symptoms of life and very limited consciousness. So in India, there are some temples in which they worship certain rocks because those rocks increase every year. You know about that? Is there one in South India? You heard about it, yeah. All these lesser forms of life also have a soul, the minute individual Jivatma, and a super soul within their material bodies. However, when we consider seemingly inanimate, dead matter, such as normal rocks, dead wood, coal, different types of metals, they do not have the presence of the individual soul, Jivatma, but they do have the presence of the super soul in every atom of their mass. Although they seem to be static, not growing or diminishing, on a more careful examination, we notice that on the atomic level they are in constant state of fluctuation. They look like they're static, but they're not. If you go down to atomic level, they're in constant movement. They disintegrate gradually to the fundamental elements of earth, water, fire, air, and ether. You leave something long enough, it disintegrates back to the original elements. So it is moving, but it's moving so slowly we can't perceive it. That's why Bose made his instrument, the crescograph, that can measure that can magnify up to 10,000 times. Today they have instruments that can measure up to 1,000,000 times. The mystery of material creation continued. By the presence of the supersoul in every atom of the universe, we can conclude that everything is conscious under normal conditions. The living entities, by virtue of the Jivatma, individual minute soul, manifest limited free will. Inanimate matter, pervaded by the supersoul, is completely controlled by the will of God through the laws of material nature. So this is the difference between conscious, living beings, like human beings, and non-conscious, or seemingly non-conscious, static objects, like stones, mountains. We have limited free will. The animals, the plants, the rocks, they don't have any limited free will. They're completely controlled. Just like one time I was listening to an imam give a lecture on Islam. And he said, ladies and gentlemen, nature, everything in nature is they're all Muslims. What was his reason? Because they have to follow God's order. They have no choice. So he said, all of nature is already Muslim. He says, only human beings, you can choose to be Muslim, Christian, or atheist. So, therefore, he said, Muhammad came to convince everyone to become Muslims like nature. You see. So anyway, basically he's saying this, that inanimate matter and lower living entities from human beings are all completely controlled by Krishna. They have no free will. Only human beings have free will. That's why we can use it correctly or we can use it incorrectly. That's why there's sin amongst human beings. When a tiger kills an animal and eats it, there's no sin involved. If a human being does it, there's sin involved. You see. That's the difference between the tiger. If you want to kill animals and eat them, next life you become a tiger. You take the body of a tiger. Then you can do it without any sin. But in this life, if you do it, then you get the sin, and you have to suffer for it. By the presence of Supersoul in every atom of the universe, we can conclude that everything is conscious under normal conditions. Okay. So, no, go back. These laws, so the Supersoul controls inanimate matter through the laws of material nature. He also controls lower forms of living entities like animals and plants through the laws of material nature. And he also controls human beings through the laws of material nature. But human beings can commit sins because they have free will. The animals, the plants, the rocks, the mountains, the rivers, they don't commit any sin. They're completely controlled by the Lord. Okay. Therefore, it is said, not a blade of grass moves without the will of God. Inanimate matter does not manifest limited free will like the living entities. Okay, go ahead. Next. So this is a picture showing the Supersoul and how the Supersoul is present in the heart of the Brahmin, the lion, the tiger, the bird, every living entity. Supersoul is present. And also, what this doesn't show is Supersoul is also present in every atom of the whole universe. Next. Bose demonstrated the use of Vedic deductive method of scientific research. Now this is very important. There are two ways of researching knowledge, deductive and inductive. In the deductive method, we accept a statement from a reliable source as truth. So that reliable source are the Vedas. There is no need for experiment to establish its validity. That's called an a priori truth. It's self-evident. For example, we accept man is mortal. We know that John is a man, therefore he is mortal. That's called deductive process of knowledge. You don't need to do any research. This is the deductive method. The Vedic knowledge is considered a priori truth, self-evident truth, proceeding from a known cause to a necessarily related effect. If we accept the Vedic knowledge, it saves much time and trouble. We can choose to also validate the Vedic knowledge for skeptics by beginning with the statements of the Vedas and verifying them by observation and experimentation. This is exactly what Bose did. We accept that plants have a soul. But I can experiment also to show that it's true. And then the skeptics, like the British scientists and the atheists, they can't argue. Because we use the scientific method to verify what is already a priori truth in the Vedas. That's real scientific work. You don't have to research if a child needs a mother and father. That's nonsense research. That's junk science. But you can verify the statements of the Vedas. Like, for example, in the Vedas it says that the stool of animals and human beings is impure. But the stool of the cow, the gobar, is pure. Now, that seems to be a contradiction, an irrational contradiction, because one place it's saying the stool of an animal is impure. The other place it's saying cow dung is pure. But if you analyze cow dung, you'll see that it has antiseptic properties. That's why they use cow dung to build houses in India, to cook food, and to clean dirty places. Right? So, even though it seems irrational, if you can experiment to show that it's actually true, it's not a contradiction. And that has happened. They have analyzed cow dung, and they've seen that it has many antiseptic products. In fact, cow dung and urine are used as medicines in Ayurveda and Unani medicine. In the inductive method, now this is the second method. It's deductive, we just explained. Now we're coming to the inductive method. We conduct a series of observations and experiments and make a hypothesis. For example, we study the lives of many people and observe that they all die eventually. We may conclude that man is mortal and postulate it as a hypothesis. With a large number of observations and experiments confirming the hypothesis, we may conclude that it is a scientific theory or an outright law of nature. But if we find one exception, then we cannot say that it is a law of nature, but only a theory that holds under certain conditions. So most scientific knowledge are theories, scientific theories. It's different than just a theory. Like I might have a theory that blue people live in my nose. But a scientific theory is they actually looked into my nose to see if there's any blue people, and if they didn't see it, then it's not even a theory, it's just speculation. But if they see the blue people in my nose, and they measure them, then they say it's a scientific theory because they don't see the blue people in Prabhu's nose. They only see it in my nose. So it's a theory that under certain conditions, there are blue people that live in certain people's noses. Bose began his experiments on plants by assuming that the Vedic knowledge that plants have consciousness was true. He organized experiments to prove that the Vedic statements were indeed true, and he succeeded. Next. Another Vedic truth that Bose confirmed was plants, like animals, adjust to change through inherited memory of the past. This implies that plants, like human beings, also have a collective memory of past lives. This is confirmed in the Srimad Bhagavatam. Sometimes we suddenly experience something that was never experienced in the present body by sight or hearing. Sometimes we see such things suddenly in dreams. This is a verse from the Srimad Bhagavatam. In the purport, Srila Prabhupada writes, in dreams we sometimes see things that we have never experienced in the present body. Sometimes in dreams we think that we are flying in the sky, although we have no experience of flying. This means that once in a previous life, either as a demigod or astronaut, we flew in the sky. Next. The impression is there in the stockpile of the mind, and it suddenly expresses itself. It is like fermentation taking place in the depths of water, which sometimes manifests itself in bubbles on the water's surface. Sometimes we dream of coming to a place we have never known or experienced in this lifetime. But this is proof that in a past life we experienced this. The impression is kept within the mind and sometimes becomes manifest either in a dream or in thought. The conclusion is that the mind is the storehouse of various thoughts and experiences undergone during our past lives. Next. Bose demonstrated the use of Vedic deductive method of scientific research. There is a chain of continuation from one life to another, from previous lives to this life, and from this life to future lives. This is also sometimes proved by saying that a man is a born poet, a born scientist, or a born devotee. Like, for example, Mozart. When he was 4 or 5 years old, he was playing the piano in an incredible way. People could tell that already in his previous life, he had played the piano. Or here, we see some kids, they're only 14 months old, 8 months old. They have cartels like this, they're jumping up and down, chanting Hare Krishna. How is that? Because in the previous life, that child was already a devotee. This is also proved by saying that a man is a born poet, a born scientist, or a born devotee. If, like Maharaj Ambarish, we think of Krishna constantly in this life, Savai Manat Krishna Padara Vindayo, we will certainly be transferred to the kingdom of God at the time of death. Even if our attempt to be Krishna conscious is not complete, our Krishna consciousness will continue in the next life. This is confirmed in Bhagavad Gita 6.41. The unsuccessful yogi, after many, many years of enjoyment on the planets of the pious living entities, is born into a family of righteous people or into a family of rich aristocracy. Suchinam Srimatam Gehe Yoga Brasta Sanjaya. Next. Radio and microwave optics. Sir Jagadish Chandra Bose pioneered the investigation of radio and microwaves optics and made very significant contributions to plant science and laid the foundations of experimental science in the Indian subcontinent. He was one of the fathers of radio science. He was the first person from the Indian subcontinent to receive a U.S. patent in 1904. This is the only patent he ever made because he was forced to do it by his colleagues. Otherwise, he didn't want to do it. Bose carried on his scientific research despite racial discrimination from certain English colleagues. He made remarkable progress in his research of remote wireless signaling and was the first to use semiconductor junctions to detect radio signals. In other words, he's the father of semiconductor technology, which became prominent in the 1970s, 80s, and 90s. He was 70 years ahead of his time. No, go back, back. However, instead of trying to gain commercial benefit from his invention, Bose made his inventions public in order to allow others to further develop his research. Next. Next. This is an equipment that Bose used for remote wireless signaling. This is the discovery of the radio. He demonstrated it. And also other things. Bose invented galena detector to detect radiation sometime during 1894 to 1898 and demonstrated in Royal Institution Discourse in 1900. Next. That's a picture, go back, that's a picture of Subhash Chandra Bose. Huh? Jagdish Chandra Bose, sorry. Okay, these are other instruments that he made for microwave apparatus. So microwaves, talking about 1900. He discovered and how to use microwaves. His major contribution in the field of biophysics was the demonstration of the electrical nature of the conduction of various stimuli, that is, wounds, chemical agents, and plants, which were earlier thought to be of a chemical nature. These claims were later proven experimentally. In other words, he proved that they're some kind of electrical transmission rather than chemical transmission. He was also the first to study the action of microwaves in plant tissue. Like if you put your hand in a microwave and turn it on, you can get seriously damaged. Right? And the food that you cook in a microwave is also seriously damaged. That's why it's not really that healthy to eat microwave food. He was the first to study the action of microwaves in plant tissues and corresponding changes in the cell membrane potential. Bose researched the mechanism of the seasonal effect on plants, the effect of chemical mechanism, chemical inhibitors on plants, stimuli, the effect of temperature, etc. From the analysis of the variation of the cell membrane potential of plants under different circumstances, he hypothesized that plants can feel pain, understand affection, etc. Later on, 25 years later, another person called Rudolf Steiner in Switzerland came up with a system of cultivation of plants called biodynamics, in which they play music for the plants. They plant them according to the cycles of the moon. They only give them compost, the compost that's made in a very special way using mantra and other things. All this was experimentally proven by Bose at least 25 years before Rudolf Steiner. Did we finish that other? Let's look at the other. Bose was the first physicist who began an examination of inorganic matter, metals and certain rocks, in the same way as biologists examine a muscle or a nerve. He subjected metals to various kinds of stimuli, mechanical, thermal, chemical, and electrical. He found that all sorts of stimuli produce an excitatory change in them. And this excitation sometimes expresses itself in a visible change of form and sometimes not. But the disturbance produced by the stimulus always exhibits itself in an electric response. He next subjected plants and animal tissues to various kinds of stimuli and also found that they give an electrical response. So metals, plants, and animals give an electrical response to stimuli. Next. Finding that a universal reaction brought together metals, plants, and animals under a common law, he next proceeded to a study of modifications in response, which occur under various conditions. He found that they all, metals and living tissues are benumbed by cold, intoxicated by alcohol, wearied by excessive work, stupefied by anesthetics, excited by electric currents, and stung by physical blows, and killed by poison. Even metals are killed by poison. That is, they no longer conduct electricity if you treat them with poison. They all exhibit essentially the same phenomena of fatigue and depression, together with possibilities of recovery and of exaltation, yet also that of permanent irresponsiveness which is associated with death. They are all responsive or irresponsive under the same conditions and in the same manner. The investigations show that in the entire range of response phenomena, inclusive as that is of metals, plants, and animals, there is no breach of continuity. Bose wrote, "The living response in all its diverse modifications is only a repetition of responses seen in the inorganic, and that the phenomena of response are determined not by the play of an unknowable and arbitrary vital force, but by the working of laws that know no change, acting equally and uniformly throughout the organic and inorganic matter." Now this sounds like he's an atheist, and we're going to explain why he said it like this. Thus there are facts that are verified by observation and experiment, such as the response to stimuli of animal tissue, plant tissue, and metals made by Bose. Next. From such data, one can formulate an interpretation of facts or a model. In other words, the facts are verified, but the interpretation of the facts is called a scientific theory or a law. Just like there's Newtonian mechanics. It is valid to predict the movement of big bodies under the force of gravity. But when you go down to atomic particles at the speed of light, Newtonian mechanics does not work at all. It doesn't explain how they move. You have to come up with a new system to explain them. That's called quantum mechanics. So in a restricted frame, certain theories are true. If you increase the frame of reference, they're not true. From such data, from such facts that are verified, one can formulate an interpretation of facts or a model, called a scientific model, that may be helpful in predicting future results. The facts speak for themselves. However, the interpretation of the facts is essential for understanding how nature works and the background arrangement of it. Bose's interpretation of facts that he gathered, however, is one that would have been acceptable or politically correct for the British scientists to whom he presented his facts. They were firmly rooted in mechanistic industrial revolution and Darwinism, and would not have taken Bose seriously if he spoke of a non-material soul. Next. Thus, Bose, in his concluding words to his book, Irritability of Plants, made an emphatic statement that the consistent behavior of plants and animal tissue with that of metals to external stimuli did not imply an unknowable and arbitrary vital force. By the phrase vital force, he refers to the soul. He attributed the origin of the observed phenomena to the workings of laws that know no change, acting equally and uniformly throughout the organic and inorganic matter. Next. When the individual soul, Jivatma, or the supersoul, is present in a material body or substance, matter responds to stimuli. Whereas when the soul is not present, matter remains unresponsive. Bose's conclusion that there is no vital force, but the laws of nature that act on organic and inorganic matter is inconsistent with his observations. His conclusion is inconsistent with the facts that he observed, and we're going to explain how. A conscious being reacts to stimuli, whether in organic or inorganic matter. Consciousness is a non-material phenomenon that cannot be reproduced by chemical or electrical means. Therefore, when a person dies, or when a material object remains unresponsive to stimuli, as Bose observed, it is due to the absence of the vital force or the soul. Next. When he refers to laws of nature, we must rationally understand that a law is made by a lawmaker. Nature doesn't make laws on its own. It's the creator of the nature that makes the laws, and under which nature functions. That lawmaker is the supreme intelligent person behind the workings of the universe. Bose claims to observe the death of animal, plant, and inorganic metal. All three stopped conducting electrical impulses when subjected to poison. Bose described this as permanent irresponsiveness, which is associated with death. When the soul leaves the body remains permanently irresponsive. Srila Prabhupada explains the relationship of consciousness to the material body in his commentary to Bhagavad Gita, chapter 2, verse 17. The individual particle of spirit soul is a spiritual atom smaller than the material atoms, and such atoms are innumerable. So such souls are innumerable. Go ahead. This very small spiritual spark is the basic principle of the material body, and the influence of such a spiritual spark is spread all over the body as the influence of the active principle of some medicine spreads throughout the body. This current of the spirit soul is felt all over the body as consciousness, and that is the proof of the presence of the soul. Any layman can understand that the material body minus consciousness is a dead body, and this consciousness cannot be revived in the body by any means of material administration. Therefore, consciousness is not due to any amount of material combination, but to the spirit soul. So, he saw that metals, as well as plant tissue, as well as animal tissue, dies when you administer large doses of poison and remains unresponsive. So that happens to me and you. If you give me poison, I will die and I'll be unresponsive. You see? Now, either you have the Jivatma or Paramatma. Jivatma and Paramatma are present in the human being and in plants and animals. Just the Paramatma is present in the metals and the rocks and what's considered dead matter. It's not actually dead. But if you treat it with poison, Paramatma can remain neutral. You can't kill the Paramatma, but it can remain neutral. And this is what happens when the material creation is wound up. When the state of avyakta, manifest material nature, is wound up, the three modes of material nature and time are taken back by Krishna, and matter becomes unresponsive, and not only that, it becomes invisible. That's why matter is more hard to understand than spirit. Spirit is always existing and visible. Matter at some point becomes invisible. You can't see it. Just like you love someone, they die, you don't see them anymore. The Twin Towers, you don't see them anymore. They were there, they disappeared. It's not that the matter doesn't exist, but that particular form doesn't exist anymore. It's very confusing for people. But the soul is always existent. We see it as consciousness. But if you treat something with unnaturally, like trying to poison it, then it remains unresponsive. Either the soul leaves the body, or the super soul becomes, goes into a state of unresponsiveness, and you cannot reactivate it. It's not a chemical thing, it's not an electrical thing. It's a spiritual thing that makes things move. According to the Vedic scriptures, the soul is eternal. For the soul there's neither birth nor death at any time. It is unborn, eternal, ever-existing, and primeval. The soul is not slain when the body is slain. Only the material body covering the soul temporarily is born and dies. Therefore, Bose's observation of the similarity of responsiveness of metals and living tissues to stimuli are consistent with the Vedic knowledge. While the soul is present in a material body, the body responds to stimulus. But when the soul leaves, the body remains unresponsive. So this is some equipment and some of the notes that he made in his experimentation with plants. Next. Invention of the radio. The British theoretical physicist James Clerk Maxwell mathematically predicted the existence of electromagnetic waves of diverse wavelengths, but he died in 1879, before his prediction was experimentally verified. The British physicist Oliver Lodge demonstrated the existence of Maxwell's waves transmitted along wires in 1887 and 88. The German physicist Heinrich Hertz showed experimentally in 1888 the existence of electromagnetic waves in free space. Subsequently, Lodge pursued Hertz's work and delivered a commemorative lecture in June 1884 after Hertz's death and published it in a book form. Lodge's work caught the attention of scientists in different countries, including Bose in India. The first remarkable aspect of Bose's follow-up microwave research was that he reduced the waves to the millimeter level, about 5 milliliter wavelengths. He realized the disadvantages of long waves for studying their light-like properties. Next. These were not printed. We have to print these. Invention of the radio. In 1893, Nikola Tesla, you've heard of Tesla Motors in California? Tesla was a brilliant man like Bose, who's only being discovered now how far ahead he was of people of his time. Demonstrated the first public radio communication. 1 year later, during a November 1884 or 1895 public demonstration at Town Hall of Kolkata, Bose ignited gunpowder and rang a bell at a distance using millimeter range wavelength microwaves. Lieutenant Governor Sir William Mackenzie witnessed Bose's demonstration in the Kolkata Town Hall. Bose wrote in a Bengali essay, Adrishya Alok, invisible light. The invisible light can easily pass through brick walls, buildings, etc. Therefore, messages can be transmitted by means of it without the mediation of wires. In Russia, Popov performed similar experiments. In December 1895, Popov's records indicate that he hoped for distant signaling with radio waves. In other words, Bose is right at the forefront of discovering radio waves and microwaves, and he's the first one to reduce microwaves to 5 milliliter length, which makes them more viable for transmission of information and signals. Bose's first scientific paper on the polarization of electric rays by double refracting crystals was communicated to the Asiatic Society of Bengal in May 1895, within a year of Lodge's paper. His second paper was communicated to the Royal Society of London by Lord Rowley in October 1895. In December 1895, the London journal, The Electrician, published Bose's paper on a new electropolariscope. At that time, the word coherer, coined by Lodge, was used in the English-speaking world for Hertzian wave receivers or detectors. The Electrician readily commented on Bose's coherer, December 1895. The Englishman, 18 January 1896, quoted from The Electrician and commented as follows: "Should Professor Bose succeed in perfecting and patenting his coherer, we may in time see the whole system of coast lighting throughout the navigable world revolutionized by a Bengali scientist working single-handed in our Presidency College laboratory." Bose planned to perfect his coherer, but never thought of patenting it. The coherer is the radio receptor. It's a receptor of radio waves. That's why a radio works. In May 1897, 2 years after Bose's public demonstration in Kolkata, Guglielmo Marconi conducted his wireless signaling experiment on Salisbury Plain. Bose went to London on a lecture tour in 1896 and met Marconi, who was conducting wireless experiments for the British Post Office. In an interview, Bose expressed disinterest in commercial telegraphy and suggested other uses of his research work. In 1899, Bose announced the development of an iron-mercury-iron coherer with telephone detector in a paper presented to the Royal Society in London. In other words, he was the forefather of the cell phone. 1895. He was the forefather of the cell phone, of wireless communication. They were using wires at that time, in telegraph and telephone. Bose was way ahead of them. Bose's demonstration of remote wireless signaling has priority over Marconi. He was the first to use a semiconductor junction to detect radio waves, and he invented various new commonplace microwave components. In 1954, Pearson and Brattain gave priority, go ahead, raise it, priority to Bose for the use of semiconducting crystal as a detector of radio waves. In other words, 54 years later, the people who were at the forefront of creating semiconductors to make computers work recognized that it was Bose's research that they were using. Further work, invention of radio, further work at millimeter wavelengths was almost non-existent for nearly 50 years. In other words, for 50 years, what Bose discovered was not used. They didn't understand what he did. In 1897, Bose described to the Royal Institution in London his research carried out in Kolkata at millimeter wavelengths. He used waveguides, horn antennas, dielectric lenses, various polarizers, and even semiconductors at frequencies as high as 60 gigahertz. Much of his original equipment is still in existence now at the Bose Institute in Calcutta. A 1.3 millimeter multi-beam receiver now in use in the NRAO 12-meter telescope in Arizona, U.S., incorporates concepts from Bose's original 1897 papers. Sir Neville Mott, Nobel laureate in 1977, for his own contributions to solid-state electronics, remarked that J.C. Bose was at least 60 years ahead of his time. And in fact, he had anticipated the existence of P-type and N-type semiconductors. Bose's 60 gigahertz microwave apparatus can be seen at the Bose Institute, Kolkata, India. His receiver used a galena crystal detector inside a horn antenna and galvanometer to detect microwaves. Bose invented the crystal radio detector, waveguides, horn antenna, and other apparatus used at microwave frequencies. Okay. So now you get an idea of how great a scientist Sir Jagadish Chandra Bose was. You should be proud of him. Right? He was on the level of Isaac Newton and Einstein. But he wasn't recognized because of racial discrimination and because he was a Brahmin. He was Brahminical. He wanted to make his research available to everyone. He didn't patent it. Right. And these are some of the other equipments that he had. Free space radiation receivers and so forth. All this stuff is 60, 70 years ahead of his time. Okay, we'll start right there. Are there any questions?
Prabhu, I have a question on our soul. In a body we said two souls. One is our own soul and another is Paramatma soul.
Yes.
And but the research and scientists are doing, I was reading an article.
Right.
Our body,
Speaking.
Prabhu, I am going to ask you about the soul. We were talking about the Paramatma soul and the individual soul, Jivatma.
Yes.
And in our body, if you look at, when I was reading an article which says we have a factory in our entire digestive system where millions of lives or bacteria are working, and they are working tirelessly. Does this bacteria have soul?
Not only a bacteria, every cell of your body is an individual soul, and you're the dominant soul. In other words, you are the president or the king of minimum 2 billion living entities. And if you do irresponsible things, like drink alcohol, smoke, some of them will revolt against you, and that is the cause of cancer. It's a revolt of some of those individuals who say that you are not leading them properly. You see, that's an explanation of cancer.
Okay,
because you have minimum 2 billion souls that you are dominating right now. You are like Saddam Hussein of 2 billion people. Right? Whatever you decide, they're forced to go along with it. But if you keep making bad decisions, they'll revolt against you. And they'll start destroying you from the inside.
And can those souls, the 2 billion...
Now, those 2 billion are the cells. Besides that, there are microbes, bacteria, worms, parasites. They're also there. You don't see them right now. But when you die, they will digest all your flesh and eventually the bones. And you'll become dust. That's why they embalm a dead body, to stop that. They kill all those extra living entities that are in your body. When you die, those 2 billion souls, they also die. They leave with you. But the others, the worms, the microbes, they don't die. They will consume you. And then they'll die. Nature has its own recycling system.
So, Prabhu, that means that 2 million or 2 billion souls, they are only sub-souls, they are not really souls.
No, they're souls. But you're the dominant soul. They're equal souls, but you are dominating them.
Okay.
Just like when your kids were young, you were dominating them. And when
Thank
you
you,
just
Prabhu.
got married, you were dominating your wife.
Okay, thank you, Prabhu.